Since independence, India followed the mixed economy system by combining the advantages of the market economic system with those of planned economic system. But in reality, the public sector dominated the control and regulations of our economy and private sector was ignored. There was a huge investment in public sector and very low investment in the private sector. The dominance of public sector for about 4 decades led to establishment of various rules and laws which hampered the process of growth and development. Now Kabir will tell us about the reasons for economic reforms.
The economic condition of India in year 1991 was very miserable. It was due to the cumulative effect of number of reasons. In the 40 years, public sector was assigned an important role to work for economic development of India. However, except for few public enterprises, the overall performance was very disappointing. Considering the huge losses incurred by a good number of public sector enterprises, the government recognized the need for making necessary reforms. Deficit in BOP arises when foreign payment for imports exceed foreign receipt from exports. Even after imposing heavy tariffs and fixing quotas, there was a sharp rise in imports. On the other hand, there was slow growth of exports due to low quality and high prices of Indian goods in international market. There was a consistent rise in the general price level in economy due to the increase in money supply and shortage of essential goods. Foreign exchange reserves, also termed as forex reserve or FX reserves, are external assets like convertible foreign currencies, gold, special drawings, etc., held by a central bank for direct financing of external payment imbalances. In 1991, foreign exchange reserves fell to the lowest level and it led to the foreign exchange crisis in India. Foreign exchange reserves declined to the level that it was not adequate to finance imports more than 2 weeks and to pay the interest that needs to be paid to international lenders. Moreover, no country or international funder was willing to lend to India. The expenditure of government was much higher than revenue. As a result, government had to borrow money from banks, public and from international financial institutions. The origin of financial crisis can be traced from the inefficient management of Indian economy. The government had to generate surplus revenue to meet challenges like unemployment, poverty and population explosion. However, there was no additional revenue due to continuous spending on development programs by the government. Moreover, government was not able to generate sufficient revenue from internal sources such as taxation, running of public sector enterprises. Government expenditures began to exceed its revenue by such large margin that it became unsustainable. At times, the foreign exchange borrowed from other countries and international financial institutions were spent on meeting consumption needs. Moreover, neither any attempt was made to reduce such profligate or reckless spending, nor sufficient attention was given to boost exports to pay for growing imports. Now the question arises. Crisis of 1991 forced India for financial help from IMF and World Bank.
Crisis of 1991 forced India for financial help from IMF and World Bank. To manage the Indian economic crisis in 1991, Indian government approached from loan from International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, popularly known as World Bank, to facilitate lending and reconstruction and development, and International Monetary Fund IMF to avail short-term loans to solve balance of payment problem. India availed $7 billion loans from these agencies as loan. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Indian finance minister in 1991 and he was greatly acknowledged for his capabilities to steer away the economic crisis looming large on the Indian economy. For availing the loan, these international agencies accepted India to liberalize and open up the economy by removing restriction on the private sector, reducing the role of the government in many areas and removing trade restrictions. India agreed to conditions of World Bank and IMF and announced the new economic policies. The new economic policy. The new economic policy was announced in July 1991 in consideration of wide range economic reforms. The main aim of the policy was to create a more competitive environment in the economy and remove the barriers to entry and growth of firms. Main policies of new economic policy. The government initiated a variety of policies which fall under these heads: liberalization, privatization, globalization. Liberalization and privatization and globalization, or LPG, are these supporting pillars on which the structure of new economic policy of our government has been erected and implemented since 1991. Now Chirag will tell about the liberalization.
Liberalization. Prior to 1991, there were large number of government restrictions in India in the areas of licensing, import, export, trade, dealing in foreign exchange, etc. In July 1991, a package of economic reforms was announced, which marked the beginning of process of liberalization in India. Liberalization means removal of entry and growth restriction on the private sector. Liberalization involves deregulation and reduction of government controls and the great autonomy of private investment to make economy more competitive. Under this process, business given free hand and is allowed to run on commercial lines. The purpose of liberalization was to unlock the economic potential of the country by encouraging private sector and multinational corporations to invest and expand, and to introduce much more competitions into the economy and creating incentives for increasing efficiency of operations. The economic reforms taken by the government under liberalization include the following: industrial sector reforms, financial sector reforms, tax reforms, foreign exchange reforms, trade and investment policy reforms. Now I want Aditya Tanwar to tell about the first reform, the industrial sector reform.
In order to make necessary reforms in the industrial sector, the government introduced its new industrial policy on July 24, 1991. The various measures under industrial policy reforms include reduction in industrial licensing. The new policy abolished industrial licensing for all projects except 18 industries. This number was further reduced to 5 industries. They are distillation of alcohol drinks, cigar and cigarettes of the tobacco manufactured for tobacco subsidies, electronic, aerospace and defense equipment, industrial explosives, etc. No licenses were needed to set up few units, expand or diversifying the existing life of manufacture. However, compulsory licensing is required for the above 5 mentioned industries on account of environmental safety and strategic conditions. Decrease in the role of public sector. One of this critical feature was the extensive reduction in the role of public sector in the future industrial development of the country. Under the new economic policy, number of industries reserved for the public sector was reduced from 17 to 8, which was further reduced to 3, namely atomic, energy, railways and defense equipments. DE reserved under small scale industries. Many goods produced by small scale industries have been DE reserved. The investment ceiling on the plant and machinery for small undertakings enhanced to rupee 1 crore. In many industries, the market was allowed to determine the price through forces of the government. Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices (MRTP) Act. With the introduction of liberalization and expansion scheme, the requirement of large companies to seek prior approval for expansion and establishment of new undertaking, merger, etc. were implicated. MRTP been replaced by Compensation Act 2002, which is more liberal. The Compensation Act 2002 was amended by the Compensation Act 2007 and again by the Compensation Act
Financial
2009.
sector reforms. Financial sector includes financial institutions like commercial banks, investments bank, stock exchange operations, and foreign exchange market. The financial sector in India is controlled by the central bank, Reserve Bank of India. RBI is known as the apex body as it occupies the topmost position in the monetary and banking system of the country. RBI decides the amount of money that the banks can keep with themselves, interest rates, and nature of lending to various sectors. The reforms introduced under financial sector are: first, change in role of RBI. The role of RBI was reduced from regulator to facilitator of financial sector. As a result, financial sector was allowed to take decisions on many matters without consulting the RBI. Second, origin of private banks. The reform policies led to the establishment of private sector banks, Indian as well as foreign. Third, increase in limit of foreign investment. The limit of foreign investment in banks was raised to around 74%. Foreign institutional investors such as merchant bankers, mutual funds, and pension funds were now allowed to invest in Indian financial markets. Fourth, ease and expansion process. Banks were given freedom to set up new branches after fulfillment of certain conditions without the approval of the RBI. Now, let's hear from Bhumika about tax reforms.
Tax reforms refer to reforms in government's taxation and public expenditure policies, which are collectively known as its fiscal policy. The major tax reforms made are: first, rationalization of direct taxes. Since 1991, there has been a continuous reduction in income and corporate tax, as high tax rates were an important reason for tax evasion. It is now widely accepted that moderate rates of economic tax encourage savings and voluntary disclosure of income. Second, reforms in indirect taxes. Considerable reform has been made in direct taxes access to facilitate establishment of common national market for goods and commodities. Third, simplification of processes. In order to encourage better compliance on the part of taxpayers, many procedures have been simplified. Now, what are the foreign exchange reforms? The important reforms made in foreign exchange market are devaluation of rupee. To overcome balance of payment crisis in 1991, the rupee was devalued against foreign currencies. This led to an increase in the inflow of foreign exchange. Second, for market domination of exchange rate. The government allowed rupee value to be free from its control. As a result, market forces of demand and supply determine the exchange value of the Indian rupee in terms of foreign currency. Third, trade and investment policy reforms. Before 1991, a lot of restrictions were imposed on imports to protect the domestic industries. However, this protection reduced the efficiency and competitiveness of domestic industries and led to their slow growth. So, the reforms in the trade and investment policy were initiated to increase the international competitiveness of industrial production, to promote foreign investments and technology into economy, and to promote efficiency of local industries and adoption of modern technologies. The important trade and investment policy reforms include: first, removal of quantitative restrictions on imports and exports. Under the new economic policy, quantitative restrictions on imports and exports were greatly reduced. Second, removal of export duties. Export duties were removed to increase the competitive position of Indian goods in the international markets. Third, reduction in import duties. Import duties were considerably reduced, which improved the competitiveness of domestic industries as it enabled them to import raw materials at better prices. Fourth, relaxation in import licensing system. The import licensing was abolished except in case of hazardous and environmentally sensitive industries. This encouraged domestic industries to import raw materials at better prices, which raised their efficiency and made them more competitive. So, what about Lakshay? Tell us about the privatization.
Privatization means transfer of ownership, management, and control of public sector enterprises to entrepreneurs in the private sector. It implies greater role to the private sector in the economic activities of the country. Over the years, Indian government has diluted its stakes in several public enterprises, including IPCL, IBP, Maruti Udyog, etc. It can be done in two ways: transfer of ownership and management of public sector companies from the government to the private sector. Second, privatization of the public sector undertaking, PSU, by selling off part of their equities of PSUs to the public. This process is also known as disinvestment. The purpose of this was mainly to improve financial discipline and facilitate modernization. Now Madhav will tell about the globalization.
Changes made by the globalization of the Indian economy. First, the new economic policy prepared a specified list of high technology and high investment priority industries, in which automatic permission will be available for foreign direct investment up to 51% of foreign equity. Second, in respect of foreign technology agreements, automatic permission is provided in high priority industry up to a sum of rupees 1 crore. No permission is now required for hiring foreign technicians or for testing indigenously developed technology abroad. Third, in order to make international adjustment of Indian currency, rupee was devalued in July 1991 by nearly 20%. It stimulated exports, discouraged imports, and raised the influx of foreign capital. Fourth, to integrate Indian economy with world, the Union Budget 1992 to 1993 made Indian rupees partially convertible, and then the rupee was made fully convertible in 1990 to 94 budget. Fifth, a new 5-year export-import policy was announced by the government to establish the framework of globalization of India's foreign trade. The policy removed all restrictions and controls on the external trade and allowed market forces to play a greater role in respect of exports and imports. Sixth, in order to bring the Indian economy within the ambit of global competition, the government has modified the custom duty to a considerable extent. Accordingly, the peak rate of customs duty has been reduced from 250% to 10% in 2007 to 2008 budget. Negative traits of globalization. The process of globalization through liberalization and privatization policies has produced positive as well as negative results both for India and other countries. Globalization resulted in greater access to global markets, advanced technology, better future for large industries of developing countries to become important players in the international arena, better prospects for skilled people across the globe to increase their earnings by utilizing their skills. Now, Kabir will tell you about standing against globalization, outsourcing, and World Trade Organization.
Globalization has been criticized by some scholars because, according to them, benefits of globalization accrue more to developed countries as they are able to expand their markets in other countries. Globalization compromises the welfare and identity of people belonging to poor quote. Market driven globalization increases the economic disparities among nations and people. As a result of globalization, MNCs have gained strong position in developing countries, due to which domestic companies are forced to face stiff competition. Outsourcing refers to a contracting out some of its activities to a third party which were earlier performed by the organization. Outsourcing is one of the important outcomes of globalization process. Outsourcing is emerging as a major activity in industrial and service sector. It was intensified in recent times because of its growth of fast mode of communication, particularly the growth of information technology with the help of modern telecommunication links, the text, voice, visual data in respect of these services is transmitted in real time over continents and national boundaries. India has become a favorable destination of outsourcing for most of MNCs because of availability of skilled manpower. India has vast skilled manpower which enhances the faith of MNCs for investment in India. MNCs get various type of lucrative offers from Indian government such as tax holidays, tax concession, etc. Low wage rates and availability of cheap labor in India for skilled work. Considerable growth of Indian IT industry which has proved its competitive strength in the world. World Trade Organization. Prior to World Trade Organization, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs was established as global trade, organized in 1948 with 23 countries. GATT was set up to administer all multilateral trade agreements by providing equal opportunities to all the countries in the international market. WTO was founded in 1995 as a successor organization to the GATT. The WTO agreement covered trade in goods as well as services to facilitate international trade. At present, there are 164 member countries of WTO, and all members are required to abide by laws and policies framed under WTO. As an important member of WTO, India has been in forefront of framing fair global rules, regulation, and advocating the interest of the developing world. India has kept its commitments made to the WTO. Now, Bhumika, can you explain appraisal of LPG policies?
Economic reforms created mixed reactions at different levels. Here are some arguments in favor of economic reforms. First, increase in rate of economic growth. The growth in GDP was 5.6% during 1980 to 1991, compared to growth rate of 6.7% in 2017 to 18. In the second quarter of 2021, that is July to September 2021, GDP growth was recorded at an impressive 8.4%. During the reform period, the growth of agriculture has declined and industrial sector reported fluctuation, whereas growth of service sector has gone up. This indicates that the growth is mainly driven by the growth in the service sector. During 2012 to 15, there has been a setback in the growth rates of different sectors. Agriculture recorded a high growth rate during 2013 to 14 but witnessed negative growth rate in the subsequent year. Service sector witnessed the highest ever growth rate of 10.3% in 2014 to 15. The industrial sector witnessed a steep decline during 2012 to 13 but began to show up a positive growth thereafter. Second, inflow of foreign investment. The opening up of the economy has led to the rapid increase in foreign direct investment. The foreign investment and foreign institutional increased from about $100 million in 1990 to 91 to $30 billion in 2017 to 18 with launch of Make in India initiative in September 2014. Foreign direct investment policy was further liberalized. Due to this reason, FDI inflow in India increased by 48%. Third, rise in foreign exchange reserves. There has been an increase in the foreign exchange reserves from about $6 billion in 1990 to 91 to about $443 billion in 2018 to 19, which increased to $63.687 billion. India is one of the largest foreign exchange reserve holders in the world. Fourth, rise in exports since 1991. India experienced considerable increase in exports of auto parts, pharmaceutical goods, engineering goods, IT software, and textiles. Fifth, control on inflation increase in production. Tax reforms and other reforms helped in controlling the inflation. The annual report of inflation reduced from the peak level of 17% in 1991 to around 5.48% in 2005 to 16. For 2022 to 23, RBI estimates indicate that inflation will move in a range of 4.5 to 5.2%. Sixth, increase in role of private sector. Abolition of licensing system and removal of restriction on entry of the private sector in areas earlier reserved for the public sector have enlarged the area of operation of the private sector. Now here are some criticism of economic reforms. Critics have raised a series of criticism against the new economic reforms, especially in the areas of employment, agriculture, industry, infrastructure development, and fiscal management. Growing unemployment. Though the GDP growth rate has increased in the reform period, but such growth failed to generate sufficient employment opportunities in the country. Second, neglect of agriculture. The new economic policy has neglected the agriculture sector as compared to industry, trade, and services sector. Public investment in agriculture sector, especially in infrastructure which includes irrigation, power, roads, market linkages and research and extension which played a crucial role in the green revolution has been reduced. Removal of fertilizer subsidies increased the cost of production, which adversely affected the small and marginal farmers. This sector has been experiencing a number of policy changes, such as reduction in import duties on agricultural products, removal of minimum support price, and lifting of quantitative restrictions on agricultural products. All these policies adversely affected the Indian farmers as they now have to face increased international competition. Due to export oriented policy strategies in agriculture, this production shifted from food grains to cash crops for the export market. It led to rise in the prices of food grains. Third, low level of industrial growth. Industrial growth recorded a slowdown due to the following reasons. First, cheaper imported goods. Due to globalization, there was greater flow of goods and capital from developed countries, and as a result, domestic industries were exposed to imported goods. Cheaper imports replaced the demand for domestic goods, and domestic manufacturers started facing competition from imports. Second, lack of infrastructure facilities. The infrastructure facilities, including power supply, have remained inadequate due to lack of investment. Non-tariff barriers by developed countries. All quota restrictions on exports of textiles and clothing have been removed from India. But some developed countries like USA have not removed their quota restrictions on import of textiles from India. Fourth, ineffective disinvestment policy. The government has always fixed a target for disinvestment of public sector enterprises. For instance, in 1991 to 92, it was targeted to mobilize 2500 crore through disinvestment. The government was able to mobilize 3040 crore, more than the target. In 2017 to 18, the target was 1 lakh crores, whereas the achievement was about 1 lakh 57 crores. However, according to some scholars, the disinvestment policy of government was not successful because the assets of PSES was undervalued and sold to private sector. Moreover, such proceeds from disinvestment were used to compensate shortage of government revenues rather than using it for development of PSEs and building social infrastructure in the country. Fifth, ineffective tax policy. The tax reduction in the reform period was done to generate larger revenue and to curb tax evasion, but it did not result in increase in tax revenue for the government. Tariff reduction decreased the scope for raising revenue through custom duties. Tax incentives provided to foreign investors to attract foreign investment further reduced the scope for raising tax revenues. Sixth, spread of consumerism. The new policy has been encouraging a dangerous trend of consumerism by encouraging the production of luxuries and items of superior consumption. Seventh, unbalanced growth. Growth has been concentrated only in some select areas in the services sector, such as telecommunication, information technology, finance, entertainment, travel, and hospitality services, real estate, and trade, rather than vital sectors such as agriculture and industry, which provide livelihood to millions of people in the country. How about Madhav tell us about the demonetization?
Demonetization. On the 8th of November 2016, the Government of India made an announcement with profound implications for the Indian economy. It was decided to demonetize high value currency notes of denomination of 500 and 1000 with immediate effect, ceasing to be legal tender except for a few specified purposes. Demonetization is the act of removing a currency unit of its status as legal tender. These notes accounted for almost 86% of the country's cash supply. As per the scheme, people had to deposit the invalid currency in the banks, and restrictions were also placed on cash withdrawals. In other words, restrictions were placed on the convertibility of domestic money and bank deposits. The aim of demonetization was to curb corruption, counterfeiting, the use of high denomination notes for illegal activities, and especially the accumulation of black money generated by income that has not been declared to the tax authorities. Features of demonetization. First, demonetization is viewed as a tax administration measure. Cash holdings arising from declared income was readily deposited in banks and exchanged for new notes. However, people holding black money had to declare their unaccounted wealth and pay taxes at a penalty rate. Second, demonetization is also interpreted as a shift on the part of government indicating that tax evasion will no longer be tolerated or accepted. Third, demonetization also led to channeling saving into the formal financial system, though much of the cash deposited in the banking system is bound to be withdrawn. But some of the new deposit schemes offered by the banks will continue to provide a base loan at lower interest rates. Fourth, demonetization also aims to create a less cash or cash light economy, i.e., channeling more savings through the formal financial system and improving tax compliance. However, digital transactions require internet connectivity as they need cell phones for customers and point of sale, understanding that it helps people into the formal economy, thereby increasing financial saving and reducing tax evasion. Now, let's hear from Bhumika about goods and services tax.
GST or Goods and Services Tax is a comprehensive indirect tax which has replaced many indirect taxes in India. The Goods and Service Tax Act was passed in the Parliament on 29th March 2017. The Act came into effect on 1 July 2017. It is a comprehensive, multi stage, destination based tax that is levied on every value addition. GST has been identified as one of the most important tax reforms post independence. The Government of India implemented GST following the credo of one nation and one tax and wanting a unified market in order to ensure the smooth flow of goods and services across the country. Tax, apart from being a source of revenue for growth, also plays a key role in making the state accountable to its taxpayers. Effective taxation ensures that public funds are effectively employed in fulfilling social objectives for sustainable development. Among other benefits, GST is expected to improve the ease of doing business in tax compliance, reduce the tax burden by eliminating tax on tax, improve tax administration, mitigate tax evasion, broaden the organized segment of the economy, and boost tax revenues. GST has replaced 17 indirect taxes like value added tax, service tax, excise duty, sales tax, etc., and 22 cesses of the center and the states, thereby eliminating the need for filing multiple returns and assessments. It has rationalized the tax treatment of goods and services along the supply chain from producers to consumers. GST is charged at each stage of value addition, and the supplier offsets the levy on inputs in the previous stages of value chain through the tax credit mechanism. The last dealer in the supply chain passes on the added GST to consumer, making GST a destination based consumption tax. The provision of availing input credit at each stage of value chain helps in avoiding the cascading effect under GST, which is expected to reduce prices of commodities and benefit the consumers. There are some types of tax under GST. First, Central Goods and Service Tax (CGST). It is the GST levied on the intrastate supply of goods or services by the center. Second, State Goods and Service Tax (SGST). It is the GST levied on the interstate supply of goods and services by the states, including union territories, with the legislature. Integrated Goods and Services Tax (IGST). It is the GST levied on the interstate supply of goods or services and is collected by the center. IGST is equivalent to the sum of total of CGST and SGST. Now, Aditya Marjan, how about you tell us about the GST Council?
GST Council, Goods and Services Tax Council, is a constitutional body for making recommendations to the union and state government on issues related to goods and services tax. Constitution, as per Article 279A of the amended Constitution, the GST Council, which will be a joint forum of the centre and state, shall consist of the following member: Chairperson, Finance Minister, Vice Chairperson, chosen amongst the Minister of State Government members, MOS Finance, and the Minister of Finance Taxation of each state. Quorum: 50% of the total number of members of the Goods and Service Tax Council shall constitute the quorum at its meeting. Majority required for taking decisions. Every decision of the GST Council shall at a meeting by a majority of not less than 75% of the weighted votes of the members be taken present and voting. In accordance with the following principle, namely, vote of the central government shall have a weighted of one-third of the total votes cast, and votes of state government taken together shall have a weight of two-thirds of the total vote cast in that meeting.